My husband and brother tried to murder me in the one place they thought was an inescapable tomb, the Utah wilderness. They forgot one thing. I'm a geologist. They didn't leave me in a tomb, they left me in my office. My name is Dr. Evelyn Reed, and 3 months ago, my husband and my brother left me for dead at the bottom of a canyon. Tonight, I'm crashing my own memorial service. The ballroom in Scottsdale, Arizona, was dripping with money and false sympathy. Hundreds of guests sipped expensive champagne and bid on my art, my jewelry, my life's possessions, all to fund a new foundation bearing my name. On stage, my husband, Julian, and my brother Leo were giving a tearful performance, the perfect picture of masculine grief. They spoke of my adventurous spirit and the tragic accident that took me from them so suddenly. The room was captivated. They had no idea the main event was just beginning. I pushed open the grand ballroom doors. A wave of silence followed me as I walked down the center aisle, my cane tapping a steady, defiant rhythm on the polished floor. I was thinner, a web of faint scars tracing my cheekbone, but my eyes were clear and hard as I met their shocked stares. Julian's voice faltered mid-sentence. Leo's face went as white as the tablecloths. They were looking at a ghost. I reached the foot of the stage and looked up at them. "Your performance is very moving," I said, my voice quiet but carrying through the silent hall. "But the artifacts of my life are not for sale tonight. This is where some family revenge stories might end. For me, this was just the beginning. There's a strange power in watching people mourn a version of you that isn't real. If you've ever felt like your own family was telling a story about you that wasn't true, just type the city you're watching from in the comments. Let's see how far our truths can travel." Before I tell you how I fought my way back, you need to understand the moment they tried to send me away forever. It happened 3 months ago, under the brilliant, unforgiving sun of the Utah Canyonlands, a place I had always loved for its raw, desolate beauty. The three of us, my husband Julian, my brother Leo, and I were on our annual adventure trip. This year, it was canyoneering through a remote slot canyon. As the geologist and most experienced climber, I was in my element, leading the way. We reached the final rappel of the day, a sheer 150-foot drop into the shadowy canyon floor below. I went first. I was about halfway down, suspended between the ancient, red canyon walls, when I heard a strange sawing sound from above. I looked up. Julian was leaning over the edge, not with a look of concern, but with a chillingly calm expression. He was holding a ceramic blade, its edge glinting in the sun. He exchanged a single, silent nod with my brother. There was no struggle, no hesitation. It was planned. He sliced through my weight-bearing climbing rope. I remember screaming, a sound swallowed by the immense stone walls. Then there was only the sickening feeling of weightlessness. The last thing I saw before the world went black was their two silhouettes, turning their backs and walking away into the sunlight, leaving me to die in the shadows. The pain of a broken body is one thing, but the pain of being erased by the two people you trust most in the world, there are no words for it. If my story is already hitting you in the heart, please hit that like button. It tells me these stories of profound betrayal are important, and that I'm not just screaming into the void. I don't know how long I lay there, a broken heap on the canyon floor. When I regained consciousness, the pain was a blinding, white-hot sun. My left leg was shattered, a compound fracture, the bone visible through the torn fabric of my pants. Every breath was agony. Panic, cold and sharp, clawed at my throat. But then, years of training took over. Not the victim's instinct to despair, but the geologist's instinct to analyze the terrain. Problem 1. Water. The unforgiving Utah sun would kill me in a day. But I knew this rock. I knew the porous sandstone layers and where to look for signs of moisture. I dragged myself, inch by excruciating inch, toward a dark patch on the canyon wall. And there it was. A slow, steady seep of precious, life-saving water filtering through ancient stone. Problem 2. Shelter and mobility. Climbing out was impossible. But I knew that water carved these canyons, and following its path downstream was my only chance of reaching a more open area. For 3 brutal days, I crawled. I splinted my femur with the remnants of my climbing harness and the skeletal branches of a dead juniper tree. I navigated by the sun's position against the canyon rim, a living compass. At night, I huddled in rock alcoves, shivering as the desert temperature plummeted below freezing. My burning rage at Julian and Leo the only thing keeping me warm. I survived not just on water and grit, but on data. I rationed my energy, calculated my progress, and treated my own survival as the most critical field study of my life. They had left me in a tomb, but they had forgotten one crucial thing. This tomb was my area of expertise. They had thrown me into the one place on Earth that I knew how to read. By the fifth day, I was slipping away. The infection from my leg was raging, and my world had shrunk to a feverish haze of pain and thirst. I was dragging myself through a dry riverbed, convinced it was the end, when I heard a sound that didn't belong, the steady crunch of hiking boots on stone. He wasn't a young hero from a movie. He was a man in his late 60s, with a face like a desert landscape and sharp, assessing eyes that had seen everything. His name was Sam, a retired search and rescue volunteer who spent his days mapping the forgotten corners of the Canyonlands. He found me not by looking for me, but by noticing my drag trail, an unnatural scar on the otherwise pristine land. With what felt like my last breath, I gave him a story. "My name is Sarah," I gasped. "Hiking accident. My group. They left me." The lie was weak, flimsy, but it was all I had. I couldn't risk telling the truth to the first person I saw. My father's influence was long, and I didn't know who to trust. Sam looked at my professionally splinted leg, then at the remnants of my high-end climbing gear. He knew my story was a lie. He'd seen enough in his 30 years of rescue work to know a recreational accident from something darker. But he also saw the raw terror in my eyes. He didn't press. He just focused on saving the life in front of him. He got me to his old Jeep and drove for hours, not to a major hospital, but to a small clinic in a forgotten town on the Arizona border. Sometimes, the greatest kindness comes not from the family that shares your blood, but from a stranger who shares your humanity. If you've ever been helped by a stranger in a moment you desperately needed it, just type kindness in the comments. Let's fill this space with some good. Recovery at the remote clinic was a slow, agonizing crawl back to the world of the living. For the first week, I was lost in a fog of pain, antibiotics, and reconstructive surgery on my leg. When I could finally think clearly, Sam handed me a satellite-connected tablet. "Figured you should see what the world thinks happened to you," he said, his expression grim, and there I was. Dr. Evelyn Reed, splashed across every major news network, missing and presumed dead. The stories painted a heartbreaking picture of a tragic canyoneering accident, but it was the quotes from my husband and my brother that made my blood run cold. Julian, the devastated husband, spoke to a reporter about my reckless passion for the edge. Leo, my heartbroken brother, talked about how he'd tried to warn me about the route's dangers. They were lauded for their tireless efforts, for personally funding the massive search party. A search party I now knew they had deliberately sent to the wrong side of the national park, 100 miles away from where they had left me to die. Then, the articles pivoted to my legacy, to my life's work. My revolutionary water reclamation patent, which the media estimated to be worth billions. Julian and Leo had already announced they were establishing the Evelyn Reed Foundation to continue her vital work for humanity. They weren't just mourning me, they were monetizing me. They were stealing my name, my work, my very memory, and wearing it like a costume of grief. Lying there, wrapped in bandages in a dusty clinic, I felt something shift inside me. Survival was no longer enough. Now, I needed justice. Justice is a fine idea when you have resources and freedom. But I was a ghost, stuck in a clinic in the middle of nowhere with a shattered leg and no identity. I had the truth, but no power to wield it. There was only one person in the world who could help me. The grizzled, skeptical man who had saved my life. Sam came by that evening with a bowl of soup and found me sitting up in bed, the tablet in my lap, my face a mask of cold fury. "Your story about a simple hiking accident is a load of bull," he said, not unkindly, as he set the tray down. "Want to tell me what really happened?" This was my one shot. I couldn't afford for him to think I was a hysterical, rambling victim. So I laid it out for him, not with tears, but with data. I presented the facts as a geologist presents a thesis. The multi-billion-dollar water patent, my husband's suspicious financial history that I'd long ignored, my brother's simmering resentment of my success, and the final, damning piece of evidence for a man like him, the deliberately misdirected search and rescue operation. As a former SAR professional, that detail made his eyes narrow with contempt. He listened without interruption, his expression unreadable. "They aren't just letting me die," I finished, my voice shaking despite my attempt at composure. "They are actively building a new life on top of my grave." He was quiet for a long time, just looking at me, then at the news article on the tablet showing Julian's tear-streaked face. In my line of work, he finally said, his voice a low rumble, "You learn to spot a liar. And that fella on the screen is lying through his teeth." "All right, Doc. I'm in. What's our first move?" And for the first time since I'd opened my eyes in that canyon, I wasn't alone. With Sam as my ally, the game changed completely. I was the hidden strategist, recovering in the desert, and he was my ghost, my boots on the ground, moving through the world they thought I had left. Sam had spent a lifetime building a network of retired cops, fellow SAR volunteers, and grizzled old-timers who knew how to find things that didn't want to be found. While I focused on healing my body, Sam went to work on dismantling their lies. A friend of his in Phoenix with a talent for financial investigation did some digging. He confirmed Julian wasn't just in debt. He was on a dangerous countdown clock with a predatory lender who didn't take kindly to missed payments. The water patent wasn't just a windfall for him. It was the only thing that could save his skin. Another of Sam's contacts in the Scottsdale art scene painted a pathetic picture of my brother, Leo, a man drowning in gambling debts. Julian hadn't just tempted him with wealth. He had leveraged his desperation, promising to clear his debts and make him a respected patron of the arts. The most damning information came from one of Sam's old SAR buddies, who confirmed the official search was a complete sham. The grid coordinates Julian and Leo provided were a geological impossibility, a place no one could have possibly reached from their supposed starting point. It was a masterclass in performative grief, designed from the start to find nothing. With every call from Sam, the picture became clearer and uglier. This wasn't a grand, tragic betrayal. It was a grubby business transaction where I was the asset to be liquidated. There's a special kind of sickness you feel when you realize your life's worth to someone can be calculated on a balance sheet. If you've ever discovered the cold, selfish motive behind a deep betrayal, just type motive in the comments. We understand that chilling clarity. The ugly motives were laid bare. My husband was a cornered animal fighting off loan sharks, and my brother was a spineless accomplice drowning in his own failures. For a moment, I considered the quiet path, an anonymous tip to the FBI, letting the legal system slowly, methodically do its work. Then, Sam sent me a link to a website, and any thought of a quiet resolution evaporated in a flash of pure, incandescent rage. The website was for the Dr. Evelyn Reed Memorial Charity Auction, hosted by the newly formed Evelyn Reed Foundation. It was a masterpiece of performative grief. The site was plastered with photos of me smiling on a mountaintop, laughing with friends, accepting a geological award. There were glowing eulogies written by Julian and Leo about honoring my spirit of adventure and discovery. But it was the auction catalog that made my vision go red. They were selling my life, my collection of antique maps, the first trilobite fossil I ever found, which I kept on my desk, my jewelry, including pieces my own parents had left me. They were even auctioning off my vintage Land Rover Defender. They were turning my cherished possessions into props for their disgusting charade, raising charity money that I knew was destined to line their own pockets and legitimize their theft of my patent. This was a level of hypocrisy so profound it was almost an art form. They hadn't just tried to kill me and steal my work. They were now publicly auctioning off my memory, my very soul. They had chosen the most public, lavish stage possible to perform their innocence. Right then, I knew. I wouldn't be sending a lawyer after them. I would be sending myself. I would meet them on that stage and give them a final performance they would never forget. Rage is a powerful fuel, but it's a poor strategist. I knew I couldn't walk into that auction as the broken woman they had left at the bottom of a canyon. I had to become someone they wouldn't recognize until it was too late. My physical recovery became the training montage for my revenge. Every grueling physical therapy session, Every painful step I took to shed the cane was focused on one single image. Walking into that ballroom, standing tall and unbroken. The constant ache in my leg wasn't just a wound, it was a whetstone, and I was sharpening myself against it. I let the desert sun darken my skin, and I began to see the faint scars on my face not as marks of shame, but as a map of my survival. With Sam, I became a tactician. We studied the auction venue's floor plans. We timed the security rounds. We planned every detail of my entrance, my speech, and the exact moment Sam would make the call to the Scottsdale Police Department. The soft-spoken academic who loved rocks and ancient history was gone. In her place was a woman who understood that the most dangerous predators often wear the most expensive suits and give the most convincing eulogies. For the auction, I bought a single, powerful dress, a deep crimson that would stand out against the sea of black and gray mourning attire. It was the color of the Utah rock, the color of blood, and the color of my rage. The metamorphosis was complete. In those weeks, the victim died a second death, and a warrior was forged in her place. If you've ever had that moment that transformed you from a survivor into a fighter, just write warrior in the comments below. Let's acknowledge that power. The night of the auction was as ostentatious and self-congratulatory as I'd imagined. Sam dropped me off a block from the Scottsdale resort, and I walked toward the glowing entrance, a ghost returning to her own wake. I felt an unnerving calm. The plan was in motion. The trap was set. I slipped into the back of the grand ballroom, a nameless guest in a sea of Arizona's elite, and watched. On stage, my husband and brother were in the middle of their final, tearful performance. Julian spoke eloquently of the unfillable void I had left in his life. Then came Leo, his voice cracking as he spoke of his protector, his guiding star. His tears of self-pity were almost believable, a perfect tribute to the sister he had helped murder. As their eulogies ended and the auctioneer prepared to open the bidding on my favorite painting, I began to walk. From the back of the room, down the long center aisle. The only sound in the suddenly quiet hall was the soft, rhythmic tap of my cane on the polished marble floor, a prop I no longer strictly needed, but one that added to the dramatic effect. Heads began to turn. Whispers spread like wildfire. I saw the exact moment of recognition in the eyes of a former friend, her hand flying to her mouth in a silent gasp. By the time I reached the stage, the entire room was in a state of stunned paralysis. Julian and Leo stared at me, their faces turning to identical masks of pure, unadulterated terror. I took the microphone from the stunned auctioneer's hand. "Thank you all for coming," I said, my voice steady and clear. "Julian, Leo, your stories were beautiful, but you left out a few key details about our trip to Utah. For instance, the part where you cut my rope." A collective gasp rippled through the ballroom, followed by a split second of absolute disbelieving silence. Then, chaos erupted. A sea of cell phones shot up, their screens glowing in the dim light as hundreds of guests started recording. The carefully curated evening of polite grief had turned into the social media event of the decade. Julian was the first to recover, his survival instincts kicking in. He grabbed the auctioneer's microphone, his voice booming with forced concern. "Ladies and gentlemen," he pleaded, trying to laugh it off. "Please, my wife is clearly not well. The trauma she has endured, she's confused. This is a private family matter that we will handle with compassion." He was trying to play his last card, painting me as the crazy, hysterical woman. Leo, on the other hand, simply crumbled. He stammered, "No, it wasn't. We didn't." His eyes darting toward the exits like a cornered animal. But I didn't have to say another word. I just looked toward the main ballroom doors. As if on cue, they swung open, and 4 uniformed Scottsdale police officers walked in, calm and deliberate. With them was my friend, Sam. He met my gaze from across the room and gave me a single, slow nod. The lead detective walked directly to the stage, showed Julian and Leo a warrant, and said the words I had been dreaming of hearing for months. "Julian Croft, Leo Reed, you are under arrest for the attempted murder of Dr. Evelyn Reed and for conspiracy to commit fraud." The flashbulbs from the press table went off like lightning, capturing the moment they were handcuffed on stage, their faces a perfect portrait of disbelief and utter ruin. My part was over. Justice was just beginning. The trial was swift. With my testimony and the mountain of irrefutable evidence, Julian and Leo were sentenced to decades in federal prison. The sensational headlines about the canyon ghost eventually faded, and in the quiet that followed, I was left with a single, defining question. What do you do with the life you fought so hard to win back? I could have sold the patent for billions and disappeared, living a life of quiet, wealthy solitude. But that would have felt like a hollow victory. Instead, I established the real Evelyn Reed Foundation. Today, we're partnering with tribal nations across the Southwest, like the Navajo and Hopi, using my technology to bring clean, sustainable water to communities that have been fighting for it for generations. I'm taking the legacy my husband and brother tried to steal and corrupt, and I'm turning it into something that gives life, not takes it. The canyon was meant to be my tomb. They left me for dead in a place of heat and rock and silence. But they didn't understand the desert. In the places that seem most desolate, life is at its most resilient. I didn't just survive the canyon, I learned from it. I learned to find strength in the harshest conditions, to find a way forward when all paths seemed closed. That brutal chapter of my life, one of the most painful family revenge stories imaginable, taught me that you cannot control the betrayals you face, but you have absolute power over what you build from the wreckage. Thank you for listening to my journey. If you believe our deepest scars can become the source of our greatest strength, and that we all have the power to write our own legacy, then I invite you to subscribe. Join a community that knows true survival isn't just about living, it's about creating a better world from the ruins.